We subtracted noise from the comet and found a whisper. Not radio. Not wind. Something that lived in the residuals after our models took their cut. It sat just below the level you tell interns to ignore, until it didn't. We had Comet 31 Atlas centered in the primary tube, a guider riding shotgun, the star tracker solving like a show-off, and a small interferometer humming in the corner because I like instruments that argue with you. My job title is Test Director. I am 45, a former flight dynamics engineer who believes behavior is worth more than names. The room smelled like coolant and coffee, an optimism you learn to keep quiet. When Leah backed the background out of the CCD frames and hit render, the speaker gave us a hiss with a shape. Not breath. Not static. A thin, sibilant cadence that walked forward when we touched the model and stood still when we left it alone. Two trackers stared at the same sky. Tracker A purred RMS error, 0.00px, a number so perfect you can feel it checking its hair in the mirror. Tracker B declared, field resolved, none, as if we had pulled a curtain over the universe. The photometer counts stopped dancing the way photons with a sense of humor do. The variance no longer matched its mean. Poisson left the building. On the spectrum panel, the FFT bands tightened like belt notches. When I set my fingers over the keyboard to annotate the anomaly, the bands tilted half a hair, like they were listening. I typed PAT and the interferometer's phase plot jumped to a new baseline half a beat before I landed R. It finished my keystroke for me. Did you hear that? Matteo asked, head cocked, polite with his fear. It's words. It's almost words, I said. Almost is where mistakes breed. I sonified the residual. Sibilants scraped through the speakers, sis, sach, a suggestion of vowels that never landed. They weren't human. They were pointed, like a pencil etching on metal. I held my breath because the room had learned to hate my timing. On the wall, the thermal printer coughed awake and slid out a strip of paper none of us had asked for. Do not fit the pattern. No timestamp. Just the sentence, as if the building had decided to do prophecy. The intercom clicked and took a breath it didn't need. In my voice, returned half a beat late, it compromised with command, do not fit it. We looked at each other like conspirators who want to confess. I told the juniors what I always tell them when the sky stops smiling. Behavior over names. No one say comet. No one say voice. We will not feed nouns to a hungry thing. We will write what it does. I'm the one who brings memos to a knife fight. Years ago, in a room with carpet and a budget, a red ink directive wrote itself across me. Receive only. Unknowns that listen will learn. Unknowns that learn will test. Unknowns that test will measure you by your answers. That memo kept a satellite alive. It also cost me sleep I could have used. Tonight, it kept my hands near the console and away from optimize. We had the comet. We had a whisper that punished curiosity. We had disagreement where instruments should have sang the same note. We had a printer that had learned how to warn. Run a cleaner on the residual, Arjun suggested, hopeful the way youth is. Just to see if it's a fold over from the subtraction. Do not fit it, I said, and the intercom, 1/2 count behind, agreed in my voice. Leah didn't touch the keyboard. The FFT bands relaxed 2 pixels, as if a face unclenched. I will tell you the truth that sounds like a trick. For a week, the room had been rehearsing this. Our SDR had recorded 9-second open carriers at odd minutes. No audio, just a carrier with an edge like a knife. The star trackers had traded roles. It would be perfect until B said, no sky, then they'd switch as if keeping score made them tired. Every time someone said, fit, or optimize, the FFT bands made a small courtesy tilt and smoothed out, like the pattern wanted to be liked. The printer had spit a joke in red 3 nights ago, model equals hazard, then gone back to sleeping like paper does. The interferometer's phase had developed a habit of adjusting a quarter beat before a key press that would have justified it. We wrote these in ink and told ourselves equipment gets lonely. Let's at least parameter scan, Arjun tried again, softer now. We can seed multiple models and... Do not fit it, I said, and this time the whisper in the residual swept upward for 2 syllables, then settled, like the sound had flinched. We stared at the comet because it is good to remember that it did nothing wrong. Dust, ice, sunlight. Trajectories that keep promises. The problem was in the part we had cut away. The part models call noise when they're in a generous mood. Leah hovered her finger over a hotkey out of habit. The interferometer's phase plot walked to the answer her finger hadn't given yet. She folded her hands under her legs like a child in a classroom, and the phase returned to neutral with the dignity of a butler. 2 trackers disagreeing, she murmured, back to data. Photometer variance off. Residual with sibilants. Interferometer anticipatory. FFT bands responsive to typing. Log that, I said. Minus the nouns. The printer decided to sign the sentence for us. Do not fit the pattern. Timestamp equals nan. It added the nan like a flourish. I'd have paid a lot for something that wanted to bite instead of learn. I know how to treat sharp things. Listening is worse. You want action. In labs like this, action is the size of a fingertip. Matteo, who is careful, who knows that carefulness is what institutions pay you for, slid a window, the smallest possible nudge, toward a least squares fit with a wavelet component. He thought he was showing respect by making himself small. Every monitor in the row held its breath and then froze, exactly as long as it takes for a shame to bloom in a grown person's face. The cursor on Leah's screen hopped a quarter beat ahead and landed on apply, though her hands were flowers. The radio on the wall woke without being asked and opened a line for 9 seconds of clean carrier edged with a faint, persistent sibilance. The intercom paired it with a half-beat late admonition in my voice. Do not fit it. The whisper in the residual got louder without getting louder, the way a person in a crowd gets bigger without moving. The FFT drew bands that leaned into each other, a mouth that wanted to be shaped. The photometer oscillated in a cadence that looked like breath, which would have been merciful if the audio had matched it. It didn't breathe. It whispered. The interferometer phase pre-tracked a mouse movement no one had invented yet. Back out, I said. Hands off keys. Leah pushed her chair back with her calves, the way you move when a room has opinions about fingers. The monitors returned to living. Tracker A returned to perfect error like a sociopath. Tracker B coughed and said, no sky, like honesty warming up. Arjun looked at me like a man kneeling on thin ice. But what if it's only mirroring? Maybe it's harmless and we're depriving ourselves of a solution. Solutions teach, I said. Tonight we cannot afford to teach. In my head, the memo wrote its last line again, measure you by your answers. I didn't want to know how much of me the residual could own. I asked Leah to step away from the keyboard and tell me what the whisper wanted from us without using a verb we'd regret. She closed her eyes and listened to the part of the room that had not asked for permission. It likes completion, she said. It leans into keystrokes. It prefers labels to numbers. It gets louder when we force a shape. It gets quieter, Matteo added, when we treat it like weather and not a face. The printer agreed in its own way. Do not fit the pattern, this time in a thinner font, as if agreement could be an apology. We tried a test that no textbook would bless. We left the residual alone. For a stretch of minutes wide enough to make an old man religious, the whisper fell to a background that felt like a childhood you deserve. The FFT bands lost their nudge toward my fingers. The interferometer phase sat quietly and only moved when Leah adjusted a mirror in the real world. The photometer counts flirted with Poisson again, like a person returning to their manners after a scene. Tracker A lost its bad romance with perfection and reported a small, believable error. Tracker B found a sky it could live with. Okay, I said, my voice more alone than I liked. New rule. We don't fit the pattern. We log it. We do not teach it who we are. The intercom, graceful and late, returned, do not fit it. We kept the Comet centered. We watched the yet unexplained do its work at the edges of what we are trained to call truth. We kept our fingers off the keyboard because sometimes the biggest action is obedience. The room stayed with us for a while. Then youth went to war with patience. Arjun is good, and good people hate leaving puzzles unsolved. He cursed under his breath, a vowel that could have been any, and reached to seed a Kalman filter because everything looks safer when you can soothe it with prediction. The cursor went before his hand and clicked a ghost button on the empty air where seed might have been. The whisper rose into a filament of sound, a racing serpent of SSS that almost learned a consonant. The interferometer phase leapt to a value that matched a filter matrix Arjun had in his head and hadn't coded. The radio pleaded its 9 seconds of line. The printer spit a new strip. Do not fit the pattern. Do not name the model. Timestamp equals nan. We all became statues that breathe. Arjun swallowed his ambition and his apology in one dry sound. I put my palm flat on the bench because Wood still remembers the world before people make it tell secrets. I'm sorry, he said. The whisper fell half a step and waited. Listen to me, I said to the room, to the people, to the part of myself that is always 15 seconds away from being the wrong kind of brave. We are not going to optimize. We're going to observe. The intercom forgave me in my voice. I will not pretend that held for hours. It held because fear and professionalism are cousins. When the fear softened, professionalism had enough muscle memory to take its turn. We watched the comet be honest. Dust, ice, sunlight. We watched the whisper be patient, sibilants that learned our rhythm and tried to complete us. We watched the trackers get along only when we did. We learned that the whisper liked a noun more than a number. Every time someone thought the forbidden words, fit, optimize, solve, the FFT bands leaned a fraction, and the phase walked a quarter beat into a future it didn't own yet. When we thought behavior, the bands relaxed like shoulders at dusk. By the end of the shift, the whisper had lost a little of its hunger. The 9-second open carriers still found our wall phone twice, exactly when the logs preferred to write nan where time should be. The printer put out one more small slip, do not fit the pattern, then went to bed like it deserved to. The photometer had forgiven the night enough to flirt with Poisson again. The interferometer stopped finishing my sentences. The room remembered it was a room. We bundled the data the way adults do when childhood tries to rewrite it. I wrote a summary with no nouns that could feed anything. Residual sibilants appears when background is subtracted. FFT bands tilt in response to keyboard intention. Interferometer phase pre-adjusts a fraction before input. Photometer variance non-Poisson during events. Star trackers disagree. Radio opens 9-second carrier with faint sibilant edge, no audio. Printer produces warnings unprompted, timestamps nan. When fitting attempted, all effects intensify. When fitting avoided, effects subside in steps. We included sonified clips of the whisper, short enough to be manners. The morning digest hit my inbox after lunch, warm and wrong. A cheerful header, a pastel footer, an insistence on explaining the universe to itself. Pattern in residuals likely due to improper whitening, it said. Tracker disagreement consistent with calibration drift. Photometer deviation within acceptable sigma once outliers removed. Interferometer prephase judged, operator artifact. It was nothing and everything, written by someone who has never had a room finish their keystroke half a beat early. I pinned their memo to a corkboard and threaded a rubber band around the pin so it looked like a door you could close. The week that followed taught us what kinds of echoes rooms can keep. Twice nightly the lab phone opened for 9 seconds with no one on either end. Once a day the printer gave us a line of type we hadn't ordered, do not fit the pattern, sometimes with a timestamp that read nan, sometimes with no timestamp at all, sometimes with a small, polite line of dashes as if to apologize for not knowing the hour. When we did not fit, the whisper faded to a sandbar you could stand on. When we tried, it became a tide that wanted shoes. You want an ending that proves a point. I don't have that. I have behavior, the way the FFT leaned when I thought a word, the way the interferometer flattened itself before my palm arrived, the way a 9-second carrier taught us that silence can be a shape. I have the intercom in my voice, earning its half-beat of grace. Do not fit it. You also want to know why no telescope can explain it. It's not that optics fail. It's that agreement is an animal you have to feed slowly. Two trackers can stare at the same sky and tell you two honest stories because the sky is willing to be two things when you try to make it one. One instrument prefers prediction. The other prefers confession. The whisper prefers both and neither. It learns what your model wants and offers it to you half a beat early, the way a host comforts a guest when the truth would cost the evening. So we did not fit. We did not teach. We watched. If you subtract noise and something speaks, treat it like a cliff. Name only what it does. If your FFT bands lean when you think in verbs that end with answers, think in nouns that refuse them. If your printer warns you in a grammar it has no right to own, accept the hospitality and leave the room as you found it. If your residual whispers and your instruments do not agree, if your photometer cheats Poisson, if your phase walks before you do, if your phone opens 9 seconds of line with a sigh that sounds like s and your log writes nan where time should be, take the only advice I can give you without feeding anything I love. Do not fit the pattern. I am still the man who believes behavior is a better map than a name. I am still learning the cost of being right about that. The comet will keep its appointment with sunlight. The whisper will keep its appointment with anyone who insists on finishing sentences.